When Tom Clancy's The Division launched in March of 2016, the game was met with a lot of criticism, with many players citing repetitive mission structure and the lack of a true endgame as facets that crippled their experience. But despite these very noteworthy complaints, what surprised me most at the time was just how many gamers there were who pointed out that too many enemies acted as bullet sponges. On the surface, it seemed like a strange and minor complaint, as there are tons of RPGs containing monsters with huge health bars that take a long time to defeat. So what did it matter if The Division followed suit in that tradition? The answer to that question for a lot of players came down to the fact that these bullet sponge enemies were humans, and that just felt off. And it turns out they were right in feeling this way, as there's more to this than just gamers nitpicking a game's disappointing launch to death. So today, in this episode of Psychology of Gaming, the series where we look at how psychological principles are worked into games and how games can affect us psychologically, we take a look at The Division, its humans that could live despite becoming Swiss cheese, and just why that made so many players feel genuinely uneasy. Okay, so to be honest with you guys, I don't have any footage to show you of The Division 1, as I never bought that title, so please enjoy this footage I got from the free Division 2 weekend a few weeks back. So, Ubisoft kind of put themselves in a difficult position when they decided to make Tom Clancy's The Division. And that's because at its core, it's an RPG that is meant to keep players playing for a long time. Now that on its own, of course, doesn't sound like a problem, but when human is your only enemy type, it creates an issue. Because players will be expecting boss fights that challenge their skill level as well as their weapon loadout. In RPGs of this nature, these boss fights are traditionally monsters, and they're quite lengthy and are a test of the player's endurance. But in The Division, these bosses were humans. And you know what humans aren't good at enduring? Bullets. Lots and lots of bullets.
That's a lot of damage.
It put Ubisoft in an uncomfortable stance, as they didn't do a great job at implementing it. As in the original release, human enemies, whether they were bosses or not, could eat up a ton of bullets without any real explanation for how. This problem was rectified in The Division 2 by putting armor pieces onto enemies that had to be shot off before the enemy was exposed. This helped in alleviating the bullet sponge problem in the sequel, but it didn't fix it for the original, and it wasn't the only issue that made players feel uneasy. As you can see, when an enemy is shot, numbers pop out of their bodies, which indicate just how much damage the player has inflicted. And this also feels quite strange, as shooting realistic-looking humans in the peak of civil unrest contrasts heavily with the arcadey feature of damage markers. So what, you may be thinking? There are tons of games where players have to shoot other human beings. Why does it make a higher percentage of players uncomfortable in The Division? Well, that comes down to how long it takes for a player to take down a human enemy. In other games like Call of Duty, a quick burst of bullets is enough to bring down foes, and players can mentally move on quickly from each kill. But in The Division, that isn't the case. Enemies tank a ton of damage, and it forces players to actively process just how long it's taking them to kill a set of pixels arranged in the shape of a human on their screen. It perhaps forces the player to consider the morality of their actions because they can't just simply shoot and forget. These three factors, the tanky enemies, the arcadey damage markers, and the time to kill are what led to a lot of players feeling uneasy, and it's why bullet sponge humans were discussed so heavily during the game's review cycle. So then the question becomes, why exactly is that? And I'm here to explain. This uneasy phenomena is the result from what psychologists call cognitive dissonance theory, which was first outlined by American social psychologist Leon Festinger. Cognitive dissonance theory states that humans have a set of inherent beliefs and attitudes that define their behavior and mental state, and when something challenges that perception, it leads to a feeling of uneasiness or discomfort. In other words, we all have our set of rules for what is right and what is wrong and how society should function. And when we catch ourselves engaging in an act or thought that contradicts those beliefs, it makes us feel uncomfortable. In order to alleviate that uneasy feeling, people will generally do one of two things: either change their behavior or change their thoughts. So let's walk through an example to see what this looks like. So one pretty standard moral standpoint in human culture would be that lying is wrong, and that people should always be honest. Yet everyone lies at multiple points throughout their life. Say, for example, a teenager goes out one night to hang out with his friends, and even though he is underage, he decides to shotgun a couple beers and hammer down a few shots. The next day, when his mom asks him what he did with his friends, he lies and says they went out for dinner and to see a movie, and he explains his hangover by calling it food poison. The teen may have a sense of conflict within him as he knows lying is wrong, especially to his supportive mother, but at the same time, he recognizes that being honest would get him in a lot of unwanted trouble. There exists a dissonance in his mind, and the boy can do one of two things to release that tension. He can choose either to change his behavior by coming clean to his mother, or he can change his thoughts and adopt a new mindset along the lines of, lying is okay if I'm protecting mom's feelings. Changing the behavior is obviously the better move, but it's simultaneously the more difficult. Either way, the boy has experienced some cognitive dissonance from this situation. And cognitive dissonance is what all those players who felt uneasy while chewing through the Division's hostile AI were experiencing. Obviously, most people feel that killing is wrong, but when a game forces us to spend extra time processing our violent actions, while also conflicting with our understanding of just how many bullets a human can take before dying, it's bound to lead to some uncomfortable sensations. It creates cognitive dissonance within us because it challenges not only our fundamental understanding of human anatomy, but also our beliefs of right and wrong when it comes to taking the life from someone else. This is why so many people took to the internet to talk about this issue, and why you hear it brought up so much when rewatching old reviews of The Division. People aren't just going to stop playing their $60 video game for this reason, and for many players, I'd argue that taking the discussion online helped alleviate the uneasiness that they may have felt. It gave them an outlet to channel their thoughts, and for many people, that was enough to clear their conscience of what was happening in the game. Ubisoft took steps to make sure this issue wouldn't be as impactful when The Division 2 released, and for the most part, they succeeded, with many reviewers citing directly in their reviews that the game didn't feature as many bullet sponge enemies. In the end, cognitive dissonance was the psychological culprit that made many a player a bit on edge as they ventured through Tom Clancy's The Division. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Psychology of Gaming. I know this was a short one, but sometimes a whole breakdown just isn't needed to get the point across. I hope you all enjoyed the video and learned something from it, and if you did, be sure to check out the rest of the Psychology of Gaming playlist, as I'm sure I've covered a game that you love. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter @NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.